Well, welcome to Black Men Speak, a podcast that highlights ordinary Black men doing extraordinary things. I'm your host, Keith Dent. It's 2026, and so today is a major milestone for us. Not only are we kicking off season 7, but this is also episode 100. And if I could, I just need to give an applause on that. That is really remarkable. I've really enjoyed just doing this podcast, and not because of what I've been doing, but just the stories that we've been able to tell. And if anyone has noticed, just kind of from a shift starting last year, or maybe 2 years ago, I really wanted to highlight Black men that are authors and really telling us authentic, wonderful stories. And so this year is no different. And today, I just couldn't think of another way to kick off our episode with this author. And I'm not going to tell you just yet, but it's going to be a powerful episode because we're going to sit down with the author of Black Cherokee to unpack a rarely kind of told story of Black and indigenous identity in America. Through personal Through history and ancestral truth and courageous storytelling, our guest explores what it means to live at the intersection of Blackness and Cherokee heritage while navigating belonging, erasure, and legacy. We dive into hidden histories that impact enslavement within Native nations and the emotional weight of claiming an identity that has often been questioned or denied. We also explore how masculinity, femininity, generational trauma, and cultural reclamation shape the lives of Black Cherokee people today and just Black and Indigenous people in general. This is more than a history lesson. It's an invitation to reflect, unlearn, and reclaim stories that have been pushed to the margins. It's a necessary dialogue about ancestry, truth telling, and the power of knowledge of who you are on your own terms. And today's guest is author Antonio Michael Downing. He's an author, education, a cultural historian. He's also a kind of, I guess, a podcaster as well that does this. Currently lives in Canada, and he's the author of our book that we're going to talk about today. And it was a deep exploration of Black and Indigenous heritage that challenge erased histories and expand the conversations around belonging, legacy, and truth. I really enjoyed the book. I mean, I claim the book as the first book I completed for 2026, so I'm really excited about it. So I'm going to bring him in, and we're just going to really talk about it. Antonio, how are you doing today?
Yo, I'm great. Keith, man, first of all, congratulations. 7 seasons, and I'm honored to be part of episode 100. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a labor of love, and you just go back. I just go back and look at how the podcast has grown and the live stream, and it's really been great. And I'm so glad that you are kicking off our season with the book. So I really am trying to challenge myself to bring more authors on to tell their stories because
Hmm.
like the book, it's kind of often overlooked because of some other things that Black men don't read as much. So maybe the stories that are being told can't be pushed from a marketing side, and just all of it's all wrapped up in the one, and it's kind of indicative of what we're going to talk about today with your book. So the one thing I thought was fascinating, because it is a story that's not often told, it's kind of interwoven in our like Black and Indigenous people. So what
Hmm.
went about your research for this book? Why did you feel compelled to write this story?
Yeah, well, it started with me traveling in the South a lot I used to work for the tech company BlackBerry back in the day.
Oh wow,
And
okay.
yeah, so, taking it way back. And my territory was the South, and I'd be traveling in the South, and I would feel all the history and the people were real friendly, but you could see that underneath they didn't really mix. And
Mm.
then I could see the plaques commemorating Confederate soldiers living right next to the black people that they fought to to enslave. And I just was really fascinated with living it. And then, you know, the characters, I feel like writing a novel is like falling in love, right? After the fact, we all got all these stories about why we did it and why it makes sense, but the truth is, it happens in a moment, in an instant. And the characters came to me. Ophelia came to me with her grandma blue, and the landscape by the river on the reservation all came to me. And then the research was in figuring out, well, why these people and who are they? And I just felt like, you know, I had a lot because I grew up in Trinidad in the Caribbean, and
Mhm, mhm.
when I came to North America at 11, I had a lot of interaction with indigenous people, and that was a shock to me because I thought from the cowboy movies they were all in the past, and it
Yeah, yeah.
turns out they're still here living. And so I really wanted to understand that, and then I was shocked that Black and Indigenous people interacted and had this whole history that goes right up to the present. You know, because when I grew up in Trinidad, Indigenous people showed up as Black and Indigenous. Like we never saw white Indigenous people mix, we saw Black Indigenous people.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
I think I was just drawn to that understanding because I'd seen that as a kid, and then when I saw it as when I came to North America, I was just kind of like, "Whoa, wait a minute! There's a story here that no one ever tells." Like when you just hear the name of the book, Black Cherokee, you right away you feel like, "Wait a minute, those things don't go together, right?" But actually, they do, and they have for a very long time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so you talked about just now that you're from Trinidad. And so growing up, did you understand your kind of your identity as a kid? And if so, did you kind of claim both as you went along, or did you find yourself having to and I guess for lack of a better word, kind of code switch depending on, where you were, or, different situations that
Yeah,
were helpful
it
for you?
was it was pretty hidden because
Mhm.
you wouldn't really differentiate between like Afro Latino, Afro Indigenous. We're just kind of like there's black people, there's Indian people, like
Mm,
East
mhm.
Indian people, and then there's like, you know, Chinese people, there's small groups of Lebanese and Middle Eastern people, but you never really saw the difference. Now, you know, I knew that I was born in Venezuela, in Caracas, Venezuela, which is having a big moment in
Yeah,
American history right now.
right,
That's
absolutely.
where, yeah, that's where I was born.
Okay.
But we didn't really differentiate like that. So mostly I was aware that there were Indian people and there were black people, but you know, a lot of our lives were intermixed. Like my uncle married an Indian lady, so he has India. I have Indian cousins. You know what I
Okay.
mean?
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
yeah, so it was just Trinidad was kind of a melting pot of everybody mingling with everybody. So I didn't really have to code switch. It's only when I came to North America and it was like, nah, 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 you black or
Yeah.
you're
Okay.
this or you're that. And then suddenly it was like when people treated me different, that's when I started becoming aware. I remember the first time someone was racist towards me. I was
Oh, okay.
yeah, I was in
Yeah.
the
Tell me about that. Yeah, I'd love to hear.
yeah, I was in the high school and it's mostly white kids and we were playing football in gym class. Now for me, football meant soccer because
Soccer,
that's what
right.
everyone
Hmm.
calls football. And so I didn't know the rules of football, like line of scrimmage,
Oh, yeah.
like
Okay.
all of that. I didn't understand it. So I would line up on offense and I'd be so anxious to run and catch the ball that I'd keep going offside. And this white dude, this Italian dude with the mullet in the back, you know how they have
Yeah,
business
yeah, yeah.
in the front, mullet in the back, or
Okay.
party in the back. And he looked over and he was playing quarterback, and I could still see his face. And he said, the N word keeps going offside. And he pointed at me all angry. And it's funny, Keith, my reaction was I was so happy because
Mm.
I'd heard of racism, but I'd never had an actual thing I could classify as, oh, this is what that word is talking about. And so when it happened, I was actually kind of like, I knew he was being a jerk, but I also understood that, oh wow, this is amazing. I finally have an experience to go at that word. And so for me, racism began with North America, which is an interesting thing because a lot of people tell us that it's human nature, but actually there's a lot of places where people don't, get down like that, right?
I do have to say, you're probably the first person I've heard that actually was glad to be, part of the culture and get,
Well,
you know,
let's just say, yeah, it's like I'm included now.
yeah, yeah,
I
that's
was a
wild.
kid,
Wow.
right? I was
Yeah,
a
I hear
kid. I
you.
didn't
I hear
get it.
you. Now, one thing that was great through the book is that you allowed the, I guess, the not the main characters to kind of weave the story of Black and Cherokee culture throughout the book. So, what do you feel? I mean, for people that haven't read it, because the goal is to get people to
Mm.
really look into reading this book and maybe delving into their own history. What stories do you feel you wanted to make sure people get out of the book?
Yeah, I felt like when I started digging into these characters that had come to me, and I learned about the history of the indigenous people at the time that the Europeans first came, and of course, Black people came right along with them, same time. And I just thought it was a really interesting history because, of course, if the person that's trying to oppress both of us, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? So you would think that indigenous and Black people would have a lot of solidarity even now, but what I
Hmm.
found was that wasn't always simple as that. And so there's five tribes that lived in the southeast. They
Hmm.
called them the five civilized tribes. So that's the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Creek, the Seminole, and of course the largest was the Cherokee. And these are the tribes that, your president, Andrew Jackson, when Andrew Jackson passed the Indian Removal Act in
Hmm.
1832, that's the law that made all those same tribes have to march to Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears,
Cheers. Right.
where infamously many of them died. But a lot of the stories of how Black and Indigenous people got down are really fascinating. Like the Seminoles would give Black runaway slaves land and status within the tribe. In fact, they would be translators for the Seminoles because the thing about it was Black folks had a more intimate relationship with the Europeans than the indigenous folks did, because the indigenous folks, they always had family out there, right? They had
Yeah.
somewhere to go out there in the land,
Right.
so they would always be leaving, whereas Black folks didn't have, we didn't have that. So what we ended up doing was being very intimate. Like we, raised their babies, we worked side by side with them, we lived in the house with them. And as a result, the indigenous tribes, when they wanted to resist, they would tap relationships with Black folks because of how intimately they understood the mutual enemy here. But unfortunately, that worked both ways. So indigenous folks, what people don't know is that the wealthy indigenous folks in those five tribes all kept slaves. And
Yes. And we kind of
and
found out that during the Ken Burns's documentary as well.
yeah, yeah, and it's known, but it's little known. And because it's not a convenient story, right? So and the truth of it is those descendants of those slaves are called the freedmen, and to this day only one of those tribes have admitted those Black folks as full members of the tribe, even though they've been living side by side with them for generations, for 200 years.
Mm,
So
mhm.
and that was in 2019. So just a few minutes ago,
Right.
the Cherokee admitted the black folks as full citizens. And I just thought that that story was, here's what I thought, why I thought that story was important, Keith. I mean, first of all, it spoke to me. That's why I chose it. But in hindsight, I just felt like excluding a person from a group, a society, a community they belong to is kind of the center of all our politics. Who's a real American?
Mm,
Are
mhm.
black people in or are they out? Are indigenous people? Oh, that person's trans. Does that mean they get the same rights as us? How does that work? And so I think that's why the story really appealed to me, because I saw in a historical story the kind of heart of all of the debates that we were having today. Not to
Mhm.
mention the fact that the descendants of the freedmen are still fighting for their rights in 2026.
Right, right. Now, one of the things that I thought was, which is woven kind of throughout the whole book, is kind of belonging.
Hmm.
No matter what culture, white culture, the Christian culture, which that was even fascinating in itself, that you brought that in, and then the Indian culture. So, why did you feel you needed that? Had all the messiness of the cultures in the book, which I thought was great, but was also in your own personal life. Did you feel? Did you ever experience kind of the messiness of the cultures?
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, Ophelia is almost like a microcosm for America trying to find their way, right? And so she belongs in these spaces, but these spaces are telling her she doesn't belong. So the indigenous people are going, "Why is your hair so curly?
Yeah.
You're not one of us." And then she goes to the black church, which is sort of the mecca of belonging for black Americans. And the black people are asking, like, well, why are you praying to the river, and why do you have these weird beliefs? And but definitely for me, I've definitely had that experience of being, number one, being an immigrant. So first of all, are you from there? Are you from here? Which
Yeah.
one are you?
Mm,
Right. And number two, being, growing up in the black church, but then realizing when I got older that some Christians don't act very Christ-like, and having to
hmm
reconcile, hey, the legacy of the black church, like so much resistance and spiritual resilience come from that, but also so much pain and hurt and shame and guilt, and like the legacy of it is so toxic. And so Ophelia I wanted you to see Ophelia going through that kind of searching for, hey, do I belong here? Hey, do I belong now? Where do I actually belong? Which, it's messy, but also it's something we all got to go through. It doesn't matter where you come from, you got to get in where you fit in, and
hmm
that ain't
hmm
and that ain't always where you think you fit in. Right.
Right, right.
Yeah, very often where you think you fit in, they tell you, nah, 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 we're not having that, or they ask you to sort of amputate yourself in a way, emotionally, so that you can belong. And so she's searching for the same kind of belonging we all are, is what I'm saying.
Hmm What's fascinating is that how, and I think even today, how people can fall through the cracks without someone or something to I guess hang on to or support, because throughout, she was she was abandoned,
Yeah,
um and it was,
essentially.
yeah, I mean, and not to give away, so much so where she was going to make she made a choice that ultimately was going to kind of set her back. And so, do you find that's just a regular thing that I guess adolescents, or they have to go through, because that's she was an adolescent at the time, and then
Yeah.
teenager. So, do you find that's what usually happens?
I wouldn't say. that it usually happens the way it happens to her, in that, you know, she really, her family, like her mom had passed away, her dad wasn't around, she's being raised by her grandma. I mean, a lot of us have been raised by our grandmothers, let's
Yeah.
be real, including myself. And then she kind of gets sent here and sent there because of life. You know, life is saying, hey, we can't afford this, or I don't want you to grow up on this reservation where they're going to teach you to hate that you're black, so let me send you to somewhere where you're going to be able to fit in. I think her particular story is unique, but I don't think it's a foreign thing to many of us to feel like we got to find ourselves,
Mm.
especially in those teenage years, right? If you're in high school, I mean, you could go the way of the church, you could go the way of the gangs, you could go the way of the streets, you could go the way of being really smart in school, you can go the way of playing sports, like, and they're not all mutually exclusive, but you got to kind of find your way and you got to kind of choose. And I always think about James Baldwin. He has
Hmm.
this in The Fire Next Time, he talks about when he realized, he was walking through Brooklyn and he realized that everybody was hustling on the street and they were all trying to recruit him, and
Mm.
he ended up choosing the way of the church, which he rebelled against later.
Right.
But I think that seeking, as a young man, and you're not secure in yourself, or a young woman, you're not secure in yourself, you're not sure, your parents telling you one thing, grandma saying another, the preacher saying another, the internet saying another. You got to find yourself. And I
Right.
think we all go through that, and I think without, like you said, Keith, without some guidance, we can all feel a little bit lost. And I think that's Ophelia's experience, is like, how do you kind of navigate this flood without a paddle or a canoe? You know what I mean?
Right. Right. And I guess, but without the kind of the intervention of the people that were around her, they ultimately kind of chose for her until she,
Yeah,
I guess, felt old enough or strong. I would say strong enough to choose for
yeah,
herself,
yeah,
which I think that definitely resonated with me. It's like, okay, you're not going to be in this group,
yeah,
even though you may be worthy of it.
yeah.
Yeah. So
And
that's
you gotta, and when we're kids, of course our parents choose for us until we're grown and we can choose for ourselves. But it is also like life, right? Life will choose for you until you have the courage and the clarity to choose for yourself.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So during, in the book, as we talked about kind of the, the research that you had to do for the book, and you highlighted, especially the, I think, Seven Nations, and but was there anything that really kind of surprised you about Black culture, Cherokee culture, as you were doing the research?
Oh man, it all surprised me. It was
Okay.
fascinating. It was fascinating. It all surprised me. I guess the biggest thing was about how the food reflected the people. And I
Mm,
and
mhm.
and that's a big theme in the book. That
Yes.
was a big thing for me because I actually took a course in Southern cooking,
Okay.
so that I could describe cooking the food properly.
Oh
So
wow.
you don't
Nice.
want to eat you don't want to eat my succotash, but I know how to cook it.
So, oh, I
Oh,
mean, let's before you go further, because I
yeah,
mean, succotash. I mean, you don't really hear about it as much. I mean, and so was it? I mean, and I remember I just didn't like wasn't a lima bean eater, kind of thing. When
yeah,
you
yeah,
have
yeah.
that when you're a kid, you're like, "Ugh, that's nasty." But when
Right.
you had it from a kind of southern perspective, you know, did it change what you thought about that particular food, or and then just southern cooking in general?
Yeah, understanding the heritage of it definitely changed how it hit for me,
Mm,
because suddenly succotash wasn't just this nice little dish, where you might
okay.
not like the lima beans. Suddenly it was like, oh, this is actually the corn the beans, the okra. These
Mm.
are actually the three cultures that made America, contributing to one dish,
Okay.
because right, and so it gave me a kind of a different view, where it realized that, oh, you know what, from an early point the cultures were mingling and affecting each other. And although politically you weren't seeing that, when you look at the food, a lot of the food has the historical lineages of all the cultures. And that was a bit of a shock to me. I didn't
Mm.
realize that.
Mhm.
Um, the mythologies are really incredible, like the old Cherokee mythologies. The one I talk about in the book is Stone Dress. Stone Dress is like this is basically an ogre, but and it's Ophelia's favorite story when she's a kid, but it's a real Cherokee old school story, about this old lady who would wander the hills and kidnap children and stuff like that. It's kind of grotesque, but because she's an old lady and Ophelia idolizes Grandma Blue, her
Mhm.
grandma who's raising her, she decides the Stone Dress is actually a good person, and she's her hero. So she loves the Stone Dress story. But I read a lot of the Cherokee mythologies, and I found them all to be super fascinating and really enriching, because it's a whole different way of seeing the land, right? Like we, you know, generally the American way is to see the land as something to exploit, something to extract resources from, or build something on,
Mhm.
or use to, make your fortune. But they had this view of the land as being alive, as being worthy of like
Mhm.
conversation and respect, and they saw themselves as people who were supposed to keep the land and take care of the land,
Right.
as
Right.
it was their job to take care of the land. So that was a whole different mindset when I started real, and you really see that in the mythologies when you read it. You realize that like there's a lot of nature talking, and nature having intelligence, and nature having spirit, and that's just a different way of looking at the land than we see it. And it feeds into how Europeans approach land as
Yeah.
something to, you
To
gotta
own.
own.
To own.
Yeah, you gotta own it. And whereas the indigenous people is like, how can you own something that's alive, and how can you own the river? And that was a concept the Europeans brought, because the ideologies were so different, and it bled into sort of property ownership. The stories of Black people back then, I think, were how resilient they were. Like the stories of Black folks running away to the Seminoles. In fact, the biggest group that didn't move east in the Trail of Tears were the
Mhm.
Seminoles, and that's why you have the Seminole Wars in the late 1800s. And the Seminole Wars was one of the big issues, was that slaves would run away from the plantations in southern Georgia into Florida where the Seminoles were, and the Seminoles would give them a safe haven. They would give them, like I said, they would give them land, they'd give them status in the tribe, they
Mm.
would have jobs and roles within the tribes. And the Seminoles, with the Black folks, fought the government essentially for the right to sort of have their own land, but also to give sanctuary, because obviously they didn't want like this huge place of sanctuary in the middle of the South where
Right.
slaves could just run away and be free. Like obviously not, right? So that was a big part of the Seminole Wars, which I didn't understand. And to this day, um, if you meet Seminoles, like there's a lot of Seminoles who look like really tall Black guys with smooth hair, right? So yeah.
So that's fascinating because yeah, it's just a story that, well, let me ask you this way. Do you feel that like both sides kind of refuse to include the other in the story? And why? Because we're fighting for the same crumbs. It's I don't understand it because it's like if it was clearly we both supported each other, especially in history. I'm saying against the Europeans, or because
Sometimes,
you know.
and sometimes they put us against each other. Sometimes they hired indigenous people as slave catchers. Then
Mm,
and then there are the famous Buffalo Soldiers, where they made black regiments to go west and
yeah,
hunt indigenous tribes from their houses. So it's
which is a kind of a group that we kind of highlight as like great people.
Yeah,
you know.
like we look up to it like, look, America is embracing us. But then when you take a step back, it's kind of like, well, the same techniques they're using to decimate them, they're going to turn and use to decimate us. The same government that's saying you're not really a person is being used to say, well, they're not people either, right? And so really, you have I mean, these are America's two great founding sins, right? Indigenous genocide
Hmm.
and black enslavement. These are the two things that built America. The land they took from the indigenous people and the free
Hmm.
labor they took from us. And so really there should be a lot of solidarity. And I can tell you yes, there's still a lot of tension between black and indigenous people because we're fighting for the same crumbs. And we know this in our own black communities. It's easy to pit desperate people against each other, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's easy to offer somebody a little bit of money to go after somebody else who looks like them. Um,
Well, and I also think the biggest thing is not knowing the stories,
right,
not knowing the histories is
right.
what's also important.
And
Um,
that is the biggest reason why Black Cherokee needed to exist,
mhm.
because I wanted people to understand that, wait a minute, like, we are just different sides of the same struggle, and we need to stand with each other and have solidarity with each other, which at times we have, but it's not enough. Like, I think most people still think of Black and Indigenous people as two separate things with two separate histories, and Black Cherokee really gets to the
Right,
heart of the fact that that's not true at all.
right, right. So one of the things I thought was interesting, and would love you to hear the take on why you went at this in this direction, was kind of the absence of black men.
Hmm.
The way the story was unfolded, it was really centered around Mama Blue, and then the I guess the daughters, but
Yeah,
the her dad, but also black men were kind of absent from the
yeah,
story. And
yeah.
was that by design, or what made you decide that you wanted to focus in that direction?
Um, I think part of it was about the the black woman and the black indigenous woman, this girl. I wanted us to see this struggle and this history through the eyes of its most vulnerable person, right?
Okay.
And in that case, the femininity of this young girl, like, she can't fight, she can't, but also she doesn't have men to protect her, right?
Mm,
That's part of it. Like, if her dad was around, he might be able to protect her or shield her from some of the things that comes at her. And I didn't want her to be protected. I wanted it to be through the eyes of someone who is completely vulnerable and had to use their wits and their spirit to figure it out and to navigate it. And so that more than anything was why there's an absence of really men at all. The men are there, like, there's a boyfriend who she knows. There's a she has school
mhm, mhm.
friends. There's the guys making the big deal for the farm that ends up polluting
Right,
the river.
right,
Like,
right.
the men are there, but they're either not sources of protection, and sometimes they're sources of harm. And so I wanted to portray a world where this person was completely vulnerable and had to figure it out on their own. And I think that that makes, I don't think that that is the most, not everyone grows up like that. A lot of
Right.
people do, but not everyone grows up like that. But I thought, hey, if you have the most vulnerable person, you're going to understand these issues very clearly because there's nothing to mitigate it, there's nothing to shield it or anything like that. It's just you're swimming in the water by yourself. No help is going to come for
Right.
you. What are you going to do?
Yeah, I could see. Yeah, I could see how it resonated because at times especially when you were reading, you thought she was on the path, and then you pulled the rug out from out of me. I'm like, oh my goodness, how devastating. But I think
Yeah.
it also is indicative of some of the things, especially our women of color go through,
Yes.
especially when they put their trust or their love into people or
Yeah.
even institutions, and then they get betrayed.
Yeah. It's a lot of women growing up a lot of women of color growing up without that male protection. And there's a lot of women of color growing up where male presence is just as likely to be a threat than it is to be a blessing. And yeah, and it is rough, it's rugged because there's no guidance, like
Mhm,
a lot of times that like the people that are supposed to be parenting her are not parenting her because they have their own struggles,
mhm, mhm,
but that's frequently how it is, especially for people of color and especially for people who didn't grow up very well off. It's it is that struggle.
yeah, yeah. And so, when you were finished, was there any part of, I guess, thing that was cathartic for you or a sense of healing as you had completed the book? Because I found it interesting. I'm like, found myself, well, what are you as the author thinking as you're writing the book? Or when you got to a certain chapter and you're like, wow, I can't believe I can't believe I went this direction. She's going to get, hurt again. So I'd love to hear about that.
Again, I feel often, Keith, authors will come in and act like they were the all-seeing eye, and it came out just how they planned it. But it's more like a sports team, right? You
Okay.
practice, you rehearse, you do all the work, but as soon as kickoff happens, your ability to guide and control it is limited because here's what I think about. I think about being true to the story, honoring
Okay.
the story, honoring the character. So if I suddenly make a character do something that's not in their nature just
Hmm.
because I want a certain outcome, that's what I've learned. It doesn't usually work, right? So I try to basically I think of the story as something that already exists and I need to just get myself out of the way. My job is to let it be the door that it comes into the world through, but don't start putting myself in it. Like I'll tell you a story about this when
Yeah.
Saga Boy, which is my memoir,
Okay.
came out in 2021, and I got a lot of praise from a lot of great writers. Casey Lehman, one of my favorite writers from Mississippi, bigged it up, and so I sat down to write Black Cherokee, and I was like, okay, you're a great writer, man. All of these people, they told you you're a great writer. You gotta be a great writer. And so every sentence and paragraph and page had me trying to prove that I was a great writer.
Mm.
And I got to tell you, Keith, that is not the way to write a book. It was I had to get out of my own way, and I figured it out when I realized, look, the way you write a book is you be a book of fiction is you be true to your character and true to the story. If the story calls for something and you and that's not what you and your ego as the writer
Mm.
want, then the writer always loses. You always lose. There are times I'm like, yo, girl, I'm trying to get this Harry Potter money. Y'all need to stop swearing. Like, come on. But you can't do that. If you do that, you end up with a mess and it doesn't work and no one believes the story you've done. And so that's how I felt with it. Like, I felt for Ophelia the same way you as a reader reading
Mhm.
it feels for her. I was like, no, oh man. But I knew that that's what the story was asking for, and so I had to serve the story rather than serve my own thoughts in it. And I think that's hard for someone who doesn't write to get, because you assume, hey, this writer is just putting what they want on the
Mm.
page. But the truth is, the great fiction writers follow the character and follow the story, and they let the story speak to them, and then they put that on the page.
Yes, I can understand that, but I guess part one section which we hadn't really talked about is the kind of the Christian perspective that
Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah.
that you wove in.
Yes.
Now it was almost like you would have needed to be on the inside of a church to
Yeah.
kind of get that perspective.
Yeah, it's
So
an inside. Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad we're talking about it, because a lot of interviewers, either because they haven't been to a black church themselves, they don't really appreciate that. But yes, you're right. I was on the inside, and so I knew those scenes myself.
okay.
But also, I did a lot of research and homework with my homegirls who grew
Mm,
up as young girls in those churches, and I researched with them about their experiences. I didn't assume that because I, as a young man, had seen those things, that my
mhm,
version was the right one. It's not a young boy. She's not me. She's a young girl. She's a young black
mm,
girl. What do
right.
young black girls go through when they're in that? And I did a lot of research. I had about 4 or 5 women who grew up in the black church, um, and had differing responses to it after. And I talked to them and I interviewed them about what their experiences were like. And because I wanted it to be, again, not about me, but about what Ophelia, my character, was going through.
Wow. Yeah. Because when I saw that, or when I read it, I was like, mm. And I didn't necessarily I grow up in church, especially not a Southern Black church, because
Right.
that was the feeling I got. That or someone that's in the church, like that is their lifestyle.
Hmm.
Really getting a sense of their whole lives are dedicated to the church and the church family, and to the kind of the behind the scenes secrecy that goes on. I thought that was fascinating, really, how you wove that in, and it almost seemed too real. And so, yeah,
Yeah, it is. It's important to me because I
yeah,
learned to read from reading the Bible. I
yeah.
learned to sing from singing hymns, and so I grew up in that. But also, I had a point where I had a lot. I Mostly my grandmother was a real faithful lady, and she read her Bible, and so when I met real Christians as a teen, I was really disappointed because I was like, wait a minute, you guys aren't really faithful, and you're doing stuff that Christ said not to do. And by the way, I know the chapter and the verse.
Yeah.
And so as a kid, I kind of, I had an experience a lot of kids have, where you discover that what the church says it is isn't always what it actually is, and that there's a dark side, and that there's a lot of difficult things happening under the surface, and you really need to be cognizant of them, because they can hurt you. And I know a lot of people that have been born and raised in the church who've been hurt by those aspects of the church, the kind of
Hmm.
judginess, and the always watching what other people have, being in other people's business, the kind of the sexual elements that play out with the adults and the kids.
Hmm.
which sometimes it's fine, and sometimes there are victims, there's collateral damage. And when that happens, it's not really something that anyone in the church wants to talk about, you know
Right. Right. Right.
and that, by the way, is endemic in all churches. The Catholic Church has their famous scandal, but even white Christian evangelicals have there's been exposés about what happens on the dark side of those churches. So
Hmm. Hmm.
so the real idea is just kind of, hey, what happens what is the price of joining that community,
Right.
right? And who has to pay it, and who does it come down hard on, and who is it easy to move through, and who does it reward? Because it's essentially a societal hierarchical structure, with winners and losers, even though it says all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, even though it says, come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden,
Yeah.
even though it says it's harder for uh, uh, easier for a camel to get through the eye of the needle than a rich man to get into heaven. Even though it says those things, we see the opposite of those things playing out all the time. In fact, there's a thing called prosperity doctrine where it's all about being rich, even
Yeah. Yeah.
though Jesus
Yeah. Hmm.
himself says actually that's not the way. So,
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
so I just
Very, very complex.
it's very complex. Now imagine if you're a kid with no one to guide you through that. Again, now
Right.
you have Ophelia's state of mind in that.
Right. Right. And one thing that, so kind of towards the end, is kind of um Ophelia's boyfriend, Christopher.
Yes.
And so would you say he was someone that was trying to live an authentic life, or was he someone that was trying to culturally appropriate or just be of the culture? That's what I found kind of fascinating.
Well, I don't know, right? What's Justin Timberlake? What
You
is
know?
Eminem? What is Iggy Azalea? I don't know. And I think that's why it's fascinating. Christopher is someone I would call a fetishizer. Now, I'm not someone that says anybody should, like, races shouldn't date each other or anything like that. It's like, if you can find love and someone
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
cares for you and sees you, man, that is rare. Hold on to it. I don't care where it comes
Right.
from. But there are some people, especially white folks, who will only date a particular race, and that
Mm-hmm.
only dating thing is what makes it a fetish, right? It's different to say, hey, I'm open to dating everybody, than to say I only date black skin, black bodies, black cultural situations. And that's what Christopher is. He's a privileged kid, wealthy kid, in a small southern town, post-industrial, and it's a mixed town with a mixed heritage. So he has access to as many black
Hmm.
girls as he wants, and that's kind of how he plays out his life. To him, it really is to piss off his dad, because his dad's this wealthy guy is trying to groom him to take over the family empire, and he's just kind of like, nah, I'm gonna get these J's on my feet and go and dance to some little John down at the club and pick up some black women. And in a way, I think that that's an element of American culture that's real. I mean, it kind of tackles this idea of how Black America creates so much culture that ends up being appropriate. It ends up not belonging to them anymore,
Right.
right? Like,
Okay.
I grew up playing in rock bands, right? I play guitar, play bass, I sing. People are like, whoa, like, you playing rock bands? What's wrong with you? That's not our music.
Mm.
And I'm
Mm-hmm.
going, wait a minute, didn't Little Richard and Chuck Berry and Fats Domino and Bo
Right.
Diddley invent rock music?
Yeah. Yeah.
And they were as black got. So that's kind of the progress of what happens to black culture. we created. It's vibrant. People love it. And then people like Christopher come and they just like, I just love it. I just want to be part of it. And then eventually they end up making more money off it than we do, like, Led Zeppelin and all of those British invasion rock stars. They copied poor Black Blues Brothers. The brothers made nothing and they became millionaires and legends.
Right.
And that's what Christopher is engaged in here. He's engaged in a process of, I love everything. As Paul Mooney once said, no, everybody wants to be a Negro. Nobody wants to be a Negro. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But one thing I could challenge a little bit is that
Yeah, please.
the only mother or motherhood that he knew
Yeah.
was from his, what I guess you want to call it, nanny.
Yeah, she was.
So
Yeah,
then
yeah,
in a sense is like, okay, where his mother was, his real biological mother was this character,
yeah.
drunkard, just like, not so that could, I guess, influence what he thought about
Oh, yeah,
women,
yeah.
or he has kind of a dichotomy going on because he had to be more, I think he was more of a pleaser,
Yes, yes.
and so
Yeah,
you
no,
could, yeah, that could be also woven in.
I agree with you. I think that's a complication. He got
Yeah.
exposed to Black culture because his wealthy family hired a Black woman to take care of the kids, raise them, nurse them, feed them, take care of them, do all the mothering work. And he grew up alongside her sons. And so he kind of listened to the music they listened to, wear the clothes they wore, and ultimately crush on the same girls they crushed on.
Yeah. Right.
And so, I don't see my job as to answer questions. I see my job as to raise the question,
Hmm. Hmm.
as to consider. And the question would be, is a guy like that, what's the difference between someone like, say, Eminem, who similarly grew up among Black folks doing similar
Hmm.
things to Christopher, and someone like Christopher or Iggy Azalea, who is like, I don't even know who Tribe Called Quest is,
Hmm.
but I'm a
Yeah.
hip hop star, right?
Right.
Like, what's the difference? And I don't, I think there is a difference, but in this case, I'm asking the question, I'm not
Yeah.
answering it, because I
Right.
think, we all have to answer it ourselves. And we all know people that are on different sides of that line too, I
Yeah,
believe.
and I like the fact that you said we all have to answer it, even if we are Black. We all have
Yeah,
to answer because we know there are Black people that don't get down with the culture,
yeah,
and vice versa. So that's
yeah.
cool.
And
So,
and we also have to look at when we see our Black kids claiming back culture, like wanting to play jazz and wanting to play blues or rock.
mhm,
We got to ask ourselves, hey, do we ostracize them for not being part of what we see as the current culture,
right,
when really all they're doing is reclaiming what was our grandfathers and great uncles culture.
right, right. So I know we're coming up against the time, but since you talked about you want people to ask questions, what questions do you want um, readers of the book to kind of either learn or unlearn or question as they're going through the story about themselves and just society in which we live?
I think the biggest question that Black Cherokee asked,
Mm,
I think there are a lot of questions in there that might hit differently to people, not me. But if you ask me, what are the big questions? I think the big question is, like I said, all of the politics we're dealing with right now is who is in and who is out, right? You got ICE roaming around city streets trying to ask that question to every single person that doesn't look white, right? Are you in? Are you one of us? Are you not? Where's your ID? We ask
mm,
it about people who maybe their lifestyle isn't what we would choose, queer people, trans people. We might be like, hey, like, should y'all be treated the same? Are you in or are you out? Malcolm X famously said, if the Constitution applied to Black people, there would be no Negro problem in America. So the problem isn't that the Constitution isn't great. The problem is that we're not included. And I think that's the central question of Black
Mm,
Cherokee.
mhm.
What happens when a society excludes someone who belongs to that society? What happens to that person? But also, what happens to the society? Because, if I cut off my thumb, I've hurt my thumb, but I've also hurt myself. And so, and then the ultimate question is, how do we heal from that sort of cutting away of someone that should be part of us? I think that's the question that defines, what we call the culture wars, and how we look at history and how we look at ourselves.
Fantastic. So, I mean, I know you actually do this as well. You interview in
I
the
do.
yeah. And so, do you like being on this side, or do you like the other side of actually interviewing?
um I think it's a different vibe because I
Okay.
mean, I mean, I can just talk when you're interviewing me, and it's awesome.
Okay.
But I think when you're the host, your job is to set up the other person so they can talk their talk, and
Okay.
so it's a different mindset, and you know, I would say I'm more practiced doing this,
Okay.
but I've now, I'm interviewing like writers from across the spectrum, like romance writers, horror writers,
Okay.
like Black writers, like Asian writers, like it's such across the spectrum. And so I think it's challenged me to um I'm always learning new things
Yeah.
when I'm hosting. But as some when I'm here, I feel like I'm talking about the stuff that I've already learned,
Gotcha.
but which is great because I love to spread that knowledge. But I also love being a host and just having to understand. Like I interviewed uh this young woman who won the Nobel Peace Prize because the Taliban shot her when she was a kid, and she became an activist, and she won the Nobel
Oh
Prize.
yeah. I
Yeah,
can't.
and
Yeah. I know her
Yashivzai is
name.
her
Yes.
name. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so I was interviewing her, and I had to learn so much just to be in that space with her and understand all the big things, but still treat her as a human being and sort of connect with her on a human level. And I love that challenge. I love
Hmm.
that challenge. So it's not better, it's just different, and
Okay.
and I really enjoy both, really.
Okay. Well, I have to say, I enjoyed throwing alley oops because you did a fantastic job of
Like,
really dunking the ball and just setting the scene of the book, because I think it was really
yeah.
fantastic and people should read it. You will not only you really get a kind of a sense of what the different cultures are like, and I think that's what we should get out of books and reading, and definitely our young or black, I shouldn't say our young black men, but our black men should read more and expand our minds. I think that really will do more to just to get us know other people better that have different viewpoints.
Yeah, absolutely. I support that.
So yeah, as we close, what's next for you?
Man, I'm finishing. In fact, I as soon as I've been writing this morning, and as soon as we're done, I'm gonna go back to writing. So I'm
Okay.
I'm I'm handwriting what I think will be the final draft of a new novel, and
Nice.
I'm very close to the end. I'm probably a week away from the end, from finishing. God
Okay.
willing. So that's about African gods reincarnated in America.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Oh wow. That
Yeah.
that's awesome. That sounds
Yeah.
awesome.
I'm very excited about that.
Me.
I was actually working on that before Black Cherokee, so this one has been a long time
Okay.
passion project. So yeah.
Okay, great. Well, Antonio, just hold on for a second. But thank you for being on today.
Yeah, I appreciate you, Keith. All the best, my brother.
Yes.
Black Men Speak was written, produced, and edited by me, Keith Dent. You can find previous episodes wherever you get your favorite podcasts. If this is your first time discovering the show, or you're a Black Men Speak podcast fan, make sure you like and subscribe. We always like to end the show with a quote, and this one comes from Wesley Studdy, a Native American Cherokee, actor and film producer who has been in such films as The Last of the Mohicans and Dances with Wolves. I like to be able to raise people's consciousness, yes, and to remind that those of us involved in the receiving end of the oppression, we have a duty. This is Keith Dent from the Black Men Speak podcast. Peace.